There is a park in Fort Worth, Texas, where children play soccer on Saturday mornings while their parents sit on the sideline in folding chairs, watching. Ordinary, American, completely unremarkable. Except directly beneath the grass those children are running on, a natural gas well is operating. The wellhead sits behind a painted green fence at the park's edge, with a noise barrier built around it so the equipment hum does not interrupt the game. That is not the strange part, because that park is not unique. There are permitted wells beneath churches in Fort Worth, beneath hotel parking lots in downtown Dallas, beneath golf courses, apartment complexes, and office parks across the Metroplex. The mineral rights under some of the most expensive suburban real estate in Texas have been quietly leased, drilled, and producing for years. And most of the people living and working above them have absolutely no idea. Because beneath Texas sits something that has done more to shape the modern world than almost any other geological fact on Earth. Not just an oil field, the oil fields. The Permian Basin in West Texas is now the single most productive petroleum basin on the planet. Texas alone produces more crude oil every single day than Iraq, Kuwait, or the United Arab Emirates. And the people driving past the painted green fence on their way to the soccer game are sitting on top of it. They have always been sitting on top of it. So how did the most oil-rich state in America become a place where most residents don't know what is directly beneath their feet? And how much more is still down there, waiting? Texas produces approximately 45% of all crude oil pumped in the United States. Not 45% of one region, of the entire country. More than 6 million barrels flow from Texas wells every single day. The Permian Basin in West Texas alone now outproduces the total national output of every OPEC member except Saudi Arabia. On the global list of oil-producing nations, if Texas were its own country, it would rank in the top 5 on Earth. There are approximately 300,000 active oil and gas wells across the state. If you distributed them evenly across Texas's 268,000 square miles, that would mean more than one well for every square mile, every city block, every stretch of highway, every suburban cul-de-sac, with tens of thousands to spare. The state has produced more than 70 billion barrels of crude oil since its first commercial wells came in. To put that number in terms a person can actually picture, 70 billion barrels is enough oil to run every car, truck, and airplane in the United States for more than 15 years without importing a single drop from anywhere else on the planet. The revenue generated from Texas Petroleum has funded cities, universities, and state government budgets for over a century. The oil royalties that flow from active wells beneath Texas land represent a separate, invisible economy operating entirely below the surface of the visible one. And most Texans, even proud ones who will tell you their state is the backbone of American energy, do not fully reckon with what is sitting beneath them. To understand how Texas became the oil capital of the world, and how much of that oil is still down there, you have to go back to a low hill on the edge of Beaumont and one man who was not supposed to be right about anything. Patillo Higgins was not supposed to be right. He was a self-taught geologist, a one-armed mechanic, and a deeply inconvenient person to have at a meeting of professional petroleum engineers. He had become convinced, after studying geological surveys of a salt dome just south of Beaumont, Texas, a low hill called Spindletop, that an enormous oil deposit was sitting directly beneath it. Not a modest one, a world-changing one. He spent the 1890s trying to convince investors, drilling companies, and certified geologists that the dome's structure was sitting on top of something no one had ever seen before. They laughed at him. Experts from the Texas Geological Survey said there was no significant oil beneath the coastal plain. Banks declined to fund further drilling. 3 of Higgins's own attempts hit nothing and cost him everything. His partners walked away. He did not stop. He hired an engineer named Anthony Lucas, one of the only professionals willing to believe Higgins's theory had scientific merit, and together they drilled again at Spindletop in 1900. At 1,139 feet below the surface, on January 10, 1901, the drill string blew out of the hole. Mud followed. Gas followed. Then, with a roar that people heard from miles away in every direction, oil erupted from the earth in a column that shot 150 feet into the air. The Lucas gusher flowed uncontrolled for 9 days before it could be capped. In those 9 days, it released approximately 800,000 barrels of crude petroleum, more than had ever been produced from any single well in the history of the American oil industry. At its peak, it flowed at 100,000 barrels per day. To match the daily output of that single well today, using modern shale technology, you would need roughly 200 average horizontal wells running simultaneously. Within a year of the discovery, Beaumont's population tripled. Hundreds of derricks crowded the hilltop of Spindletop, packed so tightly that workers could walk between platforms without touching the ground. The price of oil collapsed from $1.30 per barrel to 3 cents a barrel, because the supply was suddenly so enormous that the market had no framework for absorbing it. Spindletop did not discover oil in Texas. It discovered what oil could be. And after January 10, 1901, nothing about the American economy, the American landscape, or the 20th century was ever quite the same. Then, in September 1930, a near-bankrupt wildcatter named Columbus Joyner changed the map all over again. Joyner, known throughout the East Texas piney woods as Dad, was 70 years old. He had been drilling on leased timberland that professional geologists had reviewed and declared geologically unsuitable for a major oil deposit. He had sold fractional interest in his well to so many small investors on so many overlapping documents that the paperwork alone was a legal catastrophe waiting to be untangled. Nobody believed in what he was doing, not the geologists, not the investors who had seen his previous failures, not the oil companies who had passed on his acreage. The well, the Daisy Bradford No. 3, struck oil on September 5, 1930, at 3,536 feet. It proved the existence of what became the East Texas oil field. And the East Texas oil field turned out to be the largest conventional oil field ever discovered in the lower 48 states of America. 200 miles long, 10 to 20 miles wide, sitting beneath 5 counties and dozens of small towns whose residents had never imagined they were sitting on anything more valuable than the pine timber above them. The field held approximately 5 billion barrels of recoverable oil at discovery. When full production began in the early 1930s, Texas was producing so much crude that the price of oil collapsed again, this time to 10 cents a barrel, and the Texas Railroad Commission had to impose legally mandated production limits, called proration, just to prevent the market from destroying itself. At its peak, the East Texas field was producing 1 million barrels a day from more than 27,000 individual wells concentrated in an area smaller than the state of Connecticut. Derricks stood so densely in some sections of the field that workers called the landscape a forest of steel. Fortunes were made in weeks. Entire towns transformed overnight. The oil sat beneath the red clay and pine forests of East Texas, completely invisible from the surface, dismissed by every professional who had looked at the geology, until a 70-year-old man who refused to believe the experts proved them all wrong. Texas sits on top of so much oil because of geology that operated over a time frame that makes all of human history look like a single afternoon. The Gulf of Mexico Basin, the broader geological structure that contains the most productive Texas fields, formed when the supercontinent Pangaea began to break apart approximately 200 million years ago. The rifting created a vast sedimentary basin at the edges of the North American plate, and that basin spent the next 150 million years accumulating the ingredients for petroleum. Ancient marine organisms, plankton, algae, microscopic sea life, settled into deepening sediments, were buried under thousands of additional feet of material, and were slowly transformed under heat and pressure into crude oil and natural gas over tens of millions of years. The salt domes that made Spindletop special are a quirk of this geology. When thick layers of evaporated salt, left behind by ancient shallow seas that covered parts of Texas millions of years ago, were buried under additional sediment, the salt behaved differently from the surrounding rock. It is less dense. It rises slowly under pressure, piercing upward through overlying layers and forming dome-shaped structures that trap oil and gas in highly concentrated pockets directly above them. Patillo Higgins understood this from surface observation. The professional experts of 1900 did not believe him. The Permian Basin is a different geological structure altogether, a deep sedimentary basin in West Texas and southeastern New Mexico that accumulated organic material over hundreds of millions of years and then got sealed by impermeable rock layers that locked the petroleum in place long enough for horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing technology to eventually reach it. The oil was always there. It waited for the technology to catch up to the geology. The Permian Basin does not look like what most people picture when they think about oil. There is no single gusher moment, no wildcat drama, no fortunate madman striking it rich with a hand tool. The Permian Basin is something larger and stranger and more consequential than that, a geological formation roughly the size of Kansas that has been producing oil commercially since the 1920s and is now, in the mid-2020s, producing more crude per day than it has at any point in its 100-year extraction history. 6 million barrels flow out of the Permian every single day. That number makes it more productive than all but 2 countries on the planet. The United States, which in the 1970s was so dependent on foreign petroleum that an Arab supply cut triggered gasoline lines stretching around city blocks across the country, is now the world's largest oil producer. Largely because of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing technology applied to rock formations in the West Texas desert that no one in the 1970s knew how to access. The USGS has estimated that the Permian Basin's most productive single formation, the Wolfcamp Shale, contains approximately 46 billion barrels of technically recoverable oil. 46 billion. That is more oil in one geological layer of one Texas basin than the entire proven reserves of Iraq, as of the most recent published estimates. If you fly over Midland or Odessa on a clear night, you can see the Permian Basin from the air, not just city lights. The burn-off flares of natural gas, the illuminated drill rig towers, the compressor stations and pipeline infrastructure of one of the greatest concentrations of petroleum extraction in the history of the world, operating in a flat West Texas desert that looks, from the highway, like nothing at all. What is harder to see is the oil that sits beneath the cities. Fort Worth, Texas, sits above the Barnett Shale, a dense rock formation where natural gas had been trapped for millions of years and that nobody knew how to extract profitably until Mitchell Energy spent nearly 2 decades and hundreds of millions of dollars developing the technique. By the mid-2000s, Fort Worth was in the middle of an urban gas boom, unlike anything the city had anticipated. Wells were being permitted beneath parks, beneath golf courses, beneath school property, beneath residential neighborhoods, whose homeowners had no idea the mineral rights beneath their foundations had been leased by whoever happened to own them, which was often not the homeowner. In Texas, mineral rights and surface rights are legally separate. You can own a house, its lot, and the property taxes on both, and have zero ownership of the oil and gas beneath your foundation. Someone else can hold those rights and lease them to a drilling company. A properly permitted horizontal well can extend directionally for miles underground, accessing deposits beneath your home from a surface drill site blocks away, without your knowledge, without your consent, and entirely within the law. The landmen, the agents who negotiate mineral rights leases, have worked quietly through county courthouse records across Texas for generations, stitching together the underground ownership of land beneath neighborhoods where nobody on the surface is thinking about what is below. Some of those lease agreements go back to grandparents who signed oil rights documents in the 1940s and 1950s they expected would never be worth anything. Leases on mineral rights beneath suburban Fort Worth that sat dormant for 50 years became suddenly valuable when horizontal drilling technology made the Barnett Shale economically viable in the mid-2000s. The families who had held on to those rights, or the companies that had quietly purchased them from families who did not understand what they were selling, collected royalties, while the neighbors above the same geology had no idea the ground beneath them had become a financial instrument. They were wrong about that. The people of Fort Worth were sitting on top of something. They just did not know it yet. The oil that built Texas has never stopped trying to get out. The Permian Basin's production estimates get revised upward with nearly every new geological survey. The technology that makes extraction possible continues to improve. Horizontal wells now extend 2 miles or more laterally through rock that conventional drilling could never access. New formations get mapped, assessed, and added to the recoverable reserve figures and numbers that consistently exceed the projections of the analysts who calculate them. The Permian Basin in 2025 is producing more barrels per day than it did in 2024, which was more than 2023, which was more than 2022. A basin that has been commercially producing for a century and has had wells drilled across virtually its entire surface area is setting new production records in its second century of extraction, using technology that did not exist when the first lease was signed. Texas produced its first commercial oil at Spindletop on January 10, 1901. More than 120 years later, it is producing more oil per day than at any point in that history. The hill at Spindletop is a museum now. There is a replica gusher, a gift shop, a parking lot where the forest of steel derricks once stood so thick that workers couldn't see the sky between them. The original field is exhausted, drilled out by the frenzy of the early 1900s. But the idea Spindletop represented, that beneath ordinary Texas land, beneath the cattle ranches and the cotton fields and the church parking lots and the suburban soccer parks where children run in circles on Saturday mornings, there is something extraordinary, has never been exhausted. Patillo Higgins was not supposed to be right. Dad Joyner was not supposed to find anything in those East Texas pines. The geologists who reviewed the acreage and signed off on their reports stating there was nothing significant down there were not incompetent. They simply did not know what the rock was hiding. And beneath the green painted fence at the park in Fort Worth, the well is still producing. Because in Texas, it turns out, the oil has always been there. The only question has ever been whether anyone was looking for it in the right direction.